Hello, it's a new month. It's April. The Sportsline Podcast is rolling along here on CHCH. I'm Bubba O'Neil. And as always, I hope we have become a regular part of your daily routine. Hey, as I like to brag, no region in the province, perhaps even in the country, has helped to produce as many high-level athletes, coaches, executives, entrepreneurs, and in this case, well, it's another member of the media. And if you're familiar with the 613 area code, the name, the voice, and the sounds of this man are very close to your sporting hearts. For over 2 decades, TSN 1200's AJ Jakubec has been on the microphone calling, hosting, or doing pre- and post-game reports for pro and college sports teams that include the likes of the Red Blacks, the Senators, the 67's, Atlético, Fury as well. In addition, there's years of youth sports experience with the likes of the Ravens, the GGs, and even in his other province of Alberta. AJ, so pleased for you to join us on the Sportsline Podcast. And fella, as long as there's a microphone, you know how to get around.
Bub's my pleasure. Yeah, no, it's been quite the journey, and adding PWHL to that later this month as well, which has been a big time hit, not just around the league, but specifically in Ottawa with crowds of 8,000 plus. So looking forward to that. But yeah, if there's a game nearby, whether I'm broadcasting or just attending, always love watching some sports.
Well, I came familiar with you at the Canadian Football League, and I knew who you were. But I'll tell you what happened. And I've discussed this with you, I think, a couple of years ago. It was an early July night, 2022. Garrett Marino, Low Bridges, Jeremiah Masoli. It's controversy. The Red Blacks and the Rough Riders in Regina. Just an incredibly intense game. And I thought that this was such a controversial injury. And, of course, Jeremiah Masoli, we're kind of tied to him here in Hamilton as a former Ticat quarterback. And I listened to the post-game show that night. That you were a part of, and it may have been the best post-game show in any sport I've ever heard. And from that point, I think we've been friends.
Yeah, that was quite the night, and it still makes me mad. And I think anyone involved with the Red Blacks and anyone who knew and knows Jeremiah Masoli, I mean, it's transformed his career. Unfortunately, that was game 4 of the season, his 4th game as a Red Black, and ruined his season and probably didn't help in terms of the injury that he suffered last year. So sadly in Hamilton, that non-contact Achilles injury, and hopefully he's going to be okay and good to go. But it was just one of those things, like you do enough contact sports like hockey and football as I've done, and there's going to be things that are over the line, and you expect that, and there's things that aren't even over the line that are going to be scary just because it's a contact sport. It can be a ruthless and vicious sport, but that was one of the worst things I've ever seen in sports. And how they didn't get rid of Garrett Marino, the Saskatchewan Roughriders, not just after it happened, but after he didn't really show any remorse, is still a bit of a point of contention for me. I can't say, generally I'm pretty good in terms of burying the hatchet on things like that. But I'll say this: when Craig Dickinson got let go, I kind of thought, and he seems like a pretty good guy, but he's probably a pretty good guy that made some mistakes. And I can't say I felt any remorse about how it ended for him in Saskatchewan, just because of how the organization and himself handled that entire situation after the fact. I thought they did a very poor job of it in terms of, it's one thing to say, okay, you know what, we're defending our player. He made a mistake. We're going to stand by him and hopefully find a way to make a positive out of a negative situation. But they just kept digging a hole deeper and deeper, and it was really frustrating to watch how they handled that situation.
Yeah, it was kind of like this fake apology, and then he went and did a hat-trick job on Caleros, and then they finally, I don't know. You're right. I get it. Protect your own player and all, but, back to that post-game show, the emotion was unbelievable. Of course, the interview with Nate Behar, it was so much, and from that point, I was like, AJ's got something good going on here in Ottawa, and I've been a fan ever since. and it's been good to connect with you on the Ticats Audio Network as well, too, talking some CFL football. But, I'll ask you this question. I mean, obviously, you do so much in that 613 area code. So many of the teams that you're involved with in TSN 1200. Hey, where did the broadcasting love come from? I mean, is that something you've always wanted to do?
Yeah, I mean, I was a pretty good athlete growing up, and then I just stopped growing. So, I was 5'9" in grade 7, and I'm 5'9" and probably 6/10 today. So it's just one of those things where I played everything growing up. I played hockey, I played basketball, I played football, track and field. So I did, a lot of them grade kind of 7, 8, 9 at a pretty high level. So the goal was to be a pro athlete. The goal was to even, get a scholarship. And, there came a point in time where you started to realize, and hockey was my biggest sport. I played junior A and settled into junior B at the end. But there came a point in time where, it went from goal of playing in the NHL, goal of playing U.S. college hockey. And then it was at 18 years old, you start to realize, this ain't happening for me. So, there was probably 13, 14. I always thought that would have been really cool. And I was just a connoisseur. I watched so many different sports, whether it was in Canada and you're watching. I mean, I grew up watching Danny Gallivan, but, in the 80s, it was Don Whitman and, Chris Cuthbert and Bob Cole and those broadcasters. And in the United States as well, just watching, Brent Musburger do the NFL Today and broadcasting college basketball in the 80s. So I was just a huge sports fan growing up of so many different sports. And I always thought that would be something cool to do. And I was never going to do something that was non-sports. And I figured that was probably the thing for me. I coached for 4 years in my early 20s as well, coached hockey at a AA and AAA level. And I thought about that as a potential career path as well. While I was broadcasting at the same time, I was in BC my first 4 years, 3 years in Trail, and then 1 year in Kelowna. So I was doing a lot of different things. I mean, I was working in radio, I was coaching hockey, I was taking sport management part-time at Selkirk College in Castlegar. So it was a busy time, and I was kind of at a crossroads, 25, 26. And there just came a point where I realized I didn't really think I wanted wins and losses to determine my livelihood as a coach. And I just thought I probably had a higher ceiling as a guy that didn't play professionally as a broadcaster as well. So, yeah, it's worked out really well for me. I've been able to broadcast 9 different sports and still broadcasting 4 today between hockey, football, soccer, and basketball, which are, probably along with baseball, my biggest loves when it comes to sports. So, yeah, and it allows me to do what I like to do, talk about sports as well with a talk show, and, travel as well. And that's kind of my other biggest passion is travel. And whether it's through work or just through my own personal life, it's something that I've got this real long list of events and cities that I want to see a sporting event in. So whether it's local stuff, like Brantford's, I called OHL hockey for 14 years. And so I've been to every OHL rink, but, my last game that I called was 2019 before the pandemic. And Brantford's now the only rink I haven't been to in the OHL. And now it's probably one of those things, even though I'm not doing 67's games anymore, I'm looking at coming to Game 5 on Saturday just because I love watching junior hockey so much, but it's another opportunity to cross something off the list. So, yeah, it's I think I found the right calling, and we'll see how long it lasts, especially the way the industry is. But in the meantime, loving every minute of it while I'm fortunate to have the privilege to do this.
And it really is a privilege and an opportunity for what we get to do. And, I hear the likes of Tony Romo and I hear Michael Strahan, and they all say, because they're all getting paid more money right now as broadcasters than they ever did as players. And they're like, why didn't I do this many, many years ago? I didn't need to play. I knew enough about the sport to talk about it. But, your journey is an interesting one. And I know, kind of like myself, there was a little medical situation in 2019 that was probably pretty scary for yourself and your family, but you got through it.
Yeah, I had a real bad case of acute pancreatitis where, there was essentially damage to my pancreas and, stuff blocking my bile duct, and ended up in ICU and 69 days in hospital, missed 6.5 months of work. So it was not the best time of my life, that's for sure, but certainly was able to get through it. I mean, there's challenges that go beyond, what happened then. I'm now diabetic. So, there's different things that you have to do on that front. And again, never going to be fully the same in terms of my body and my pancreas, but, one of those things. And I think I always, I don't think there's any question. I always, it's not like I took things for granted before, but you really appreciate every day that you're able to do something. Well, there's a lot of different things, again, travel-wise, where, when I was in hospital, I said, because I've been to a lot of places. I've been to all 50 states. Well, it was like, okay, I needed to get to all 10 provinces, and I was able to get to PEI in New Brunswick and complete that. I wanted to go to a World Cup. I got to do that in 2022, and just started checking off more things, different countries that I've been to. And just hoping to keep checking them off, going to Copa America and the Summer Olympics this year. So, and it's one of those things like, I mean, maybe I could have had the opportunity. There's a lot of broadcasters and media people that have had the opportunity to work those. And I've been fortunate to work Stanley Cup finals and Grey Cups and U Sport national championships and other major events, especially in this country, World Juniors as well. But I didn't want to have to just kind of wait for my opportunity for other events. So, I went to the World Cup on my own dime. I'm going this summer to the Olympics and Copa America on my own dime because, you can only control certain things. I'd love to have people pay me to work those events, but it's not always in the cards. So control what you can control. And whenever I get the opportunity to travel for work or sports, it's a blessing. And it precedes what happened to me in 2019 medically, but that certainly put a stamp on things that, okay, you never know what's going to happen to you, whether it's medically or something else, and better make the most of it while I'm still here on this planet and try and do the things that I want to do while I'm here.
And that's an unbelievable inspiration, a lesson for every single one of us, whether you're a sports fan or not, to take advantage of life and get out there and do the things that you want to do. And switching gears, you did talk about maybe coming to see a Game 5 in Brantford as the Bulldogs and the 67s are going toe-to-toe. And, boy, the Bulldogs look so good in Game 1 of the series. The fans were going wild. They're calling it the Madhouse on Market Street. They had the flag, the little white towels going crazy. The whiteout was in effect. They looked good in Game 1, and then, wow, the 67s came out on a real – I thought they jumped all over the Bulldogs. And we talk about this all the time in pro sports. We know that the likes of Luca Pinelli and Henry Muse are going to be the guys out front, but Cooper Foster scoring 2 goals, who would have called that for Game 2 in the 6-3 victory for Ottawa?
Yeah, well, I think this 67s team, and I'm not as familiar as with these 67s teams than I would have, like pre-2019 when I was calling the games, but I think the one thing, and I went to about 10 or 12 games last year and all their home playoff games, including in the second round against the Peterborough Petes. And, that was a team that won 50 games. I don't think it was anywhere near as good as the team that won 50 games in 61 games back in 2019-20 before the pandemic ended their season. I mean, that team was stacked and was destined to go, I think, to win an OHL championship and compete in a Memorial Cup. It's unfortunate it never happened. But, there were some players that probably were younger, the Cooper Fosters, the Brad Gardners, the Brady Stonehouses that, really got their first. I know they played the year before as 16-year-olds, but it was a short run. They ended up losing to Hamilton in round 1, and it was a team that really wasn't expected to do much. Last year, they were expected to do much, And, generally when you talk about junior hockey, teams are led by their 19 and 20-year-olds. And that Ottawa team last year was, even though they had all those wins, they were a bit of a younger team, and they had a lot of players that were key players that were in that 17, 18 vicinity. And now those guys are a little bit older. Again, Matt Mayich on the blue line, and Cooper Foster and Brad Gardner and Brady Stonehouse and Will Giroir. And so, I feel like this is a more battle-tested team. And I didn't think Ottawa played very well in game one. They were undisciplined, and Brantford certainly took advantage of that and full value for the win. But Ottawa showed in game two, I think, what we've been waiting for the last few weeks, because they didn't finish the season very strongly as well. They were 500 in their last 13 games. They lost all 4 games that they played against the top 6 in the conference, losing to Brantford, losing to Mississauga, losing to Oshawa. So they didn't really finish the season strong, and I think they needed more from some of those veteran guys that have that playoff experience. So not surprised in the least that Cooper Foster was the guy that stepped up. Yeah, I mean, it's Luca Pinelli up front, and it's Muse on the back end, and certainly Colin McKenzie in goal. But the strength of this team isn't about 1 or 2 or 3 players. It's about the entire group that they have. Other than Pinelli, who scored the 48 goals, they don't really have a big offensive juggernaut, but they do have strength in numbers. And, this team, if they do get on a roll, it's interesting. I was the broadcaster the last time this team went to a Memorial Cup. It was in 2005, and they didn't even host or win the OHL title. But that was the year London was an absolute powerhouse, one of the best teams I've ever seen in major junior hockey. Just a stacked team with, guys that were really good NHL players as well. You think of Corey Perry and Mark Mathod amongst others, but a team that had a lot of just really good junior hockey players, the Danny Severets, the Dylan Hunters, and so on and so forth. And they ended up beating Sidney Crosby and Rimouski to win the Memorial Cup that year during the lockout. But Ottawa had a team that year, and you kind of knew London was hosting the Memorial Cup, and they were probably going to win their side, and they ended up winning their side quite handily. So you knew whoever was coming out of the East was going to the Memorial Cup. And it was the same thing. There were 6 teams, 1 through 6, that were, I think, 9 points apart that year, or maybe it was even 5. I think it was 5. It was 9 this year, and it was 5 that year. And Ottawa, they didn't really have, again, an offensive juggernaut, but they were 3 lines deep, and they kind of needed to find themselves in the first couple of rounds when they beat Barrie and they beat Sudbury, and Danny Bottaccio was stealing games and one of the best goaltending runs I've ever seen at that level. But this team, if they're going to go deep and maybe equal what that team did, well, let's say Saginaw ends up winning the West as the host team, then whoever wins the East gets in, no matter what happens. And I do think all 6 teams have a legitimate chance, given the fact that there's 9-point separation. It's who gets hot at the right time, who gets the best goaltending at the right time. But it's about who comes together. And that's the type of game, a road win against a real strong Bulldogs team in a tough environment, as you mentioned, the Madhouse on Market Street. That's the type of road win that I'm really fascinated to see the response from both these teams here tonight in Ottawa, and see where this series heads. Because for me, it feels like a bit of a 50-50 series at this stage, and I think we're going to have a lot of those in the East, which is awesome for fans, maybe not so fun for the coaches pulling their hairs out, but we'll see how these teams respond here tonight, because I think we did see 2 completely different games on the weekend in Brantford.
Well, Reed Duffy, the play-by-play guy of the Bulldogs, kind of echoed that both teams weren't playing at their best rolling into the postseason. The Bulldogs did win 3 straight, I believe, to close it out. But prior to that, if you look at their best 10, I think they were both about 5-4. But yes, you're right. The second season, anything happens. It's all about the momentum. Certainly these coaches, and McKee and Cameron, they've been there before. And let's see how this one plays itself out. Game 3 could be very, very pivotal in the nation's capital. sticking on the ice. And again, we continue these sort of Hamilton and Ottawa similarities. And of course, we're talking the likes of Michael Andlauer, Steve Staios, guys that have laid their lumber down here in the Hamilton area, winning the likes of an Ontario Championship, 2, in fact. And now they're leading the Ottawa Senators, and there will be no playoffs for the, again, since 2017. What's the mindset of the Ottawa hockey fans there for the Ottawa Senators?
Yeah, it's been a frustrating season. This is 7 years out of the playoffs. I mean, certainly you're not far away from Buffalo. It's going to be 12 years out of the playoffs for them. I mean, I'm from Edmonton, and I spent about 3 or 4 years in Edmonton during the decade of darkness, after 2006 when they went to the Stanley Cup final and lost to Carolina and then missed the playoffs 10 straight years. So I've been through this before. It's frustrating because after 5 years of not really being close to a playoff team, year 6, there was some hope. They finished with 86 points. They played, it was a handful of meaningful games in March. Unfortunately, it didn't get beyond that, but they actually did play some meaningful games in late February and early March last year where they beat Detroit back-to-back. And then they went into New York and won, and then they came home and Chychrun played his first home game, and the crowd was going crazy, chanting, "We want playoffs," and they got a big win, and then they headed out west and just completely tanked, starting with a 5-0 loss in Chicago last year, lost 4-5, and just like that, as quickly as kind of that excitement had started about a playoff drive in March and April again, it fell apart and they were out of it. So it was a disappointing end of the season, but they still finished with 86 points. It was 13 more than the year before, and you felt okay. I felt Ottawa and Buffalo were two teams that were poised to take a jump. Buffalo was even ahead of Ottawa last year when it came to that playoff chase, and I thought both were going to make it as wild cards this year. And it's been such a disappointing season for both of them, and I think it shows the importance of veteran leadership. And it's nice to have a good young core, and both the Sabres and Senators have that, both on the blue line and up front. Goaltending's been a bit of a question mark in both places, but there is just a sense of optimism. And when you look at the playoff race right now in the Eastern Conference, to me, it's really disappointing to see the teams that are there. A Washington team with, I don't know what it is right now, but hovering around a -30 goal differential. Yeah. On the season. That's right in the thick of things. The Philadelphia Flyers and a Detroit team that whenever Ottawa plays Detroit, they seem to have their number and seem to be the superior team. And it feels like Ottawa and Buffalo have much better young cores than the Red Wings have. But the thing the Red Wings did is they went and surrounded that group with better veterans, and that's why they're in the midst of a playoff chase. And the Senators and the Sabres are not. And I feel like the Sens and the Sabres are two teams that, when they play their best, they're way better teams than Washington, Philadelphia, and Detroit. And it's shown every time Ottawa plays those teams, all three of them. But the problem is that there's too much variation. They give you an A game one night and an F game the next. Especially just watching this Ottawa team. And I'm not watching the Sabres every night, but I'm sure, the frustrations are very similar with that fan base, especially having a playoff drought that's even 5 years longer than Ottawa. So it's been a disappointing season. It's been a season of regression, I guess. There's been some positives. I mean, they've won 5 in a row right now. And, I think I differ with a lot of the fan base that is mad about the draft stock. I think it's important. Now, I think they've made some strides recently under Jacques Martin in terms of the way that they can play. They can now play a structured game. They just need to carry that over into next year. Now, it's going to be a new head coach next year, so there's still a lot of heavy lifting. They still need, you can't just pretend that, okay, well, everything's fine now. They've won 5 in a row. They'll be able to carry this into next season. No, they need to figure some things out in the roster. They need more veteran support, both up front. They need to revamp the blue line. They need more physicality back there. and the goaltending situation. I mean, Korpisalo's been better lately, and Forsberg as well, with a pretty impressive shutout recently. But I don't think you can roll back, even though they're both under contract, Korpisalo for 4 more years and Forsberg next season. I don't think you can roll back both of these guys next season as your 1 and 2 once again, just based on what we saw throughout the majority of the season. So there's going to be a lot of moves that Steve Staios and his management group need to make, starting with the coaching hire. And I think they need, when you talk to people in the know, I think they need somebody, a coach that's going to hold these players accountable, whether it's a veteran coach like a Gerard Gallant or a Craig Berube, who would have a lot of experience with Dave Poulin, ex-teammates, and Dave's part of the management group as well, or whether they find somebody else. But that to me is probably right at or near the top of the list in terms of a wish list for a head coach, is someone that can hold these players accountable and do it from day one. I mean, Bobby Ryan said it on their podcast within the last week or so that he thought it was a little too country clubbish in terms of the training camp after fitness testing. Okay, it was too much of a breeze after that. So clearly, and this team has just started poorly every season under DJ Smith. They finished strong, and once again, they're finishing strong this year under interim head coach Jacques Martin. But that's something there needs to be a tone set from training camp, and certainly someone that's going to hold this group accountable to basically take what this group has done towards the end of the season and build on that finally from the start of the season next season.
Well, I'm just going to throw this out here. I mean, because it's been proven, and we've seen it in the likes of Michael Andlauer as an owner, and even Steve Staios. They like their guys. And there are 2 guys here that helped them win an Ontario Hockey Championship on teams that, and one team in particular, people did not think they were going to win. And that would be like the John Gruden, right? A guy who has spent lots of time with the Islanders program, Boston as well too, has a son playing in the league. And even Jay McKee, right, who put in all kinds of years with the Sabres as that rock-solid defenseman and is doing wonders. And in fact, it's a shock to me that he has not won OHL Coach of the Year. Maybe this is the year that he gets it based on a team and the fact that the team moved and all the things that have happened. Do you think those guys are ready, or does it have to be an established coach?
It's a great question. I feel like a Gruden or McKee would be the best candidate potentially next time around. But I feel like they need the guy now. That's just my sense right now, and especially in talking to people, and that is someone with experience. They just haven't hired somebody with experience in ages, really, since Brian Murray. And Brian Murray led them to a Stanley Cup. I mean, you look at, okay, they hired John Paddock, who had experience. Okay, so, and we're talking about 2007 when they hired John Paddock. So let's look at the lineage of Ottawa Senators coaches. And I get it's a different era. Eugene Melnick's not here anymore. It's a different ownership group. It's a different management group. So I get it. But the reality is they inherited this. And what they've inherited is an organization that went from Corey Clouston, first-time head coach, to Paul McLean, first-time head coach, to Dave Cameron, first-time head coach, Guy Boucher, second-time head coach, and say what you will about Guy, he led them to within 1 goal of the Stanley Cup Finals.
That's right.
And then DJ Smith, first-time head coach. It hasn't worked. Doesn't mean it's not going to work, but the numbers tell you that coaches have their most success on their second job. So, I look at a guy like an Andre Tourigny, for example, in Arizona. Like that, I don't know whenever they're going to turn things around there. I don't even know if they're going to stay there. Are they going to move to Salt Lake City? I mean, that's a saga for 15 years. And I don't mean to get sidetracked here on that, and I won't. But I look at Andre Tourigny as a guy, in his next job, I think he's going to be a rousing success based on what he's done, with very little in Arizona and just his track record. So, look, I dealt with John Gruden when I was back calling games in the league. I have the utmost respect for him as a man. He was great to deal with whenever he needed an interview, and certainly the job he did with those Bulldogs teams, for sure. And, he's paid his dues. He's been an American League coach. He's been an NHL assistant coach. So he fits the profile. And look, I'm not going to sit here and say it would be a mistake, because maybe he comes in and he holds the team accountable and he's exactly what the team needed. But my preference at this stage would be someone with experience. We'll see who else comes available. But again, it doesn't have to be someone with experience if you don't have quality candidates out there. But when you've got Gerard Gallant and also Craig Berube that are out there and have had the type of success that they have had, I have a hard time passing on that, given what the Ottawa Senators at this time need as an organization.
Maybe even Quenneville. I know there are some things that people are going to have to get around, but I mean, the guy's record and what he's done and his accomplishments speak for themselves. Let's clean up on this, AJ. We're getting very close here. I was thinking about this. I'm like, wow, we're not too far away from CFL training camps opening up. And we had this wild free agent frenzy, which I thought was the most fun to follow. I mean, you might agree too, as a broadcaster, and the most chatter I think we've seen in the offseason for the Canadian Football League. I mean, as you talk about disappointments for the Senators, the Red Blacks have to be even more of it. I could hear it in your voice calling some games last year, and some of the decisions that were made during on-game situations, some of the personnel changes that were happening. Obviously, injuries were a factor, as they always are, but the Red Blacks were on the outside looking in again. Do you see a change in this season coming up, and what Sean Burke has, basically got a gun to his head? He's got to win.
Yeah, I mean, it's been tough because, talking about the Ottawa Senators in 7 years, it's only been 4 seasons for the Ottawa Red Blacks. Now there's a missed season in there as well, but the 4 have been just so bad. I mean, they've won 14 games in 4 seasons, which is one of the worst 4-year stretches in the history of the CFL. It's not even the worst in Ottawa CFL football, because they've had, I'm trying to remember exactly what 4 years it was in the late 80s, but they won 12 in a 4-year stretch, I think from 86 to 89. I might have those years wrong. Certainly Super Season 88 was in there for sure. So, Ottawa's endured some bad football. Whether it was the Renegades, the Rough Riders, or this last 4-year stretch of the Red Blacks. I'm optimistic. I'm cautiously optimistic. I really like Sean Burke as a man. I think, he's got all the, like, when you look at Sean Burke and you look at Bob Dice, they've got all the makings of being a great general manager in this league and a great head coach in this league. And sometimes, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about not wanting wins, not wanting a field of like where basically wins and losses was determining whether I was staying on in the job or not, when I was coaching back in the day. And, that's the reality. When you're a coach, when you're a manager, it's all about wins. It's all about losses. And you can do the best possible job ever. And some things out of your control, like quarterbacks getting hurt or whatever it might be, happen, and all of a sudden maybe you would have had a good team and now you don't. So I am cautiously optimistic. I think that they made the necessary moves in the offseason to try and turn this around, whether it's shake up the coaching staff a little bit and bring in Tommy Condell as the offensive coordinator and a few other different coaching moves, whether it's, load up on quarterback depth. You keep Crum, you keep Masoli, but you go out and you get Drew Brown. They brought in skill position players like Dominique Grimes. They've bolstered their secondary with Adarius Pickett, defensive player of the year in the East last year in Toronto. So I think they made some solid depth moves as well, but there's still a lot of unknowns. I'm still not 100% sold on how this offensive line is going to be. I think there's a lot of good parts, but right tackle is still a question mark. I do think they've addressed some of that in the sense that if neither Canadian first-round pick from the last couple of years, Dante Bull or Zach Pelios, is ready to take that job, that they've got a couple of Americans that they've brought in that could fill the role, but that leaves maybe a hole elsewhere where you don't have as much depth in terms of other Canadian starters beyond kind of the safety position. So, and the secondary is the other one. It was woeful last year. It's the worst I've ever seen it. Like, generally, when you looked at the way the Red Blacks had been in the previous 3 seasons, you looked at the offense on why they had been so poor. Last year, the offense, it was okay, which was a step forward from how woeful it was the 3 previous seasons. It still wasn't good enough, but it was okay. The front 7 was pretty good last year, but the back was just, especially for about a 6 or 7 game stretch, from 3-3 to 3-9, where they lost 6 in a row. It was just absolutely, it was the worst I'd seen in 10 years of watching Red Blacks football. And I've been to every game, broadcast every game in that stretch. So, yeah, we'll see. They brought in a new defensive backs coach. Baron Miles is still there as defensive coordinator. I think they lost a pretty good D-line coach in Mike Fair, who's now head coach of a team in Japan. So we'll see how it all plays out. But, there's still a lot of question marks. There would have been question marks on Rick Campbell, who, like, you look around the league, and you got 9 coaches, and 7 of them have won a Grey Cup. And so, and eventually, kind of like your point about John Gruden and Jay McKee, eventually you got to get that first opportunity. But the question is, can Bob Dice, who's got so many great qualities, he's a leader of men, he's so highly respected, and I think, it's not a situation where, like, some coaches are highly respected and are really liked by their players. Like, I think he's liked, he's respected, and probably feared a little bit as well, which to me is the right combination of traits that you want in a head coach. It's not like, if they make a mistake, they're not going to be held accountable. They're absolutely going to be held accountable. So that's not an issue. I guess the questions in terms of the coaching staff are, okay, how do things look on the defensive end this year as a whole? Because, again, with how bad the secondary was at times last year, you can ask questions. Was it personnel? Was it scheme? Was it a little bit of both? I'm not smart enough to tell you what the answer is. I just know it wasn't good enough. And so you've changed some of the personnel. How's the scheme going to be? How's that going to be? So that's one question. And then, again, I think you touched on it a little bit. And you're not going to be questioned on decision-making if things go well. But when things don't go well and there's going to be some controversial decisions, you're going to get roasted for it. And I think we'll see how Bob Dice approaches that going forward. It's interesting because when I look at coaching football in particular, it feels like decision-making, like if you do everything else right, it's probably the least important of setting a culture and your X's and O's and your schemes and everything like that, adjustments. Like, those are the most important things. That's 90 to 95% of it. And then, okay, in-game decisions is, it kind of takes care of itself for the most part. But
which Dice was questioned about. Which Dice was questioned about last year.
For sure. And that's the part that fans probably question the most, because that's what they can see. You can't tangibly see the culture and what the room is like and scheme and everything like that. You can to a certain degree, but you can tangibly second guess decisions. And, there were some that, we had Brendan Galanders on, who was a special teams captain, and he adamantly defended, special teams captain prior to last year. He had retired. So we had Galanders on the radio last year, and he was adamant in defending Bob Dice on the decision to kick the field goal in BC, which they returned for a touchdown with just over a minute to go. And he was saying he gave a lot of reasons why they should have kicked the field goal at that point. So I was kind of 50-50 on that one. The one that I didn't like was when they kicked the field goal from the one in Regina.
Yes.
And then kicked off, and Saskatchewan came right back, kicked a field goal, and won the game. I thought they should have gone for it, because at the very least, if you don't get it, and it was a yard, and you should be able to get a yard in your sleep in the Canadian Football League. If you don't get it, at the very least, they're 1st and 10 from their own 1. And you should be able to get the ball back and maybe then kick a game-winning field goals. So I didn't like that decision, but I'm also not being paid to make those decisions. It's a lot easier in the broadcast booth. So I'm fascinated to see how that all plays out. The East is an interesting one for me, because I feel like the East didn't get a lot of credit last year for how good it was. Toronto was the best team in the league by a mile. Montreal, deserving Grey Cup winners for how they, beat Toronto in the playoffs, and then beat Winnipeg in the manner that they did. They got hot at the right time. Am I sold that Montreal is going to be a juggernaut? No, I think they're going to be a good team, but I feel like I don't know. I kind of feel like they're a 10-8 team. I don't feel like they're 14-4. The Argos, they lost a lot of players, and there's a cloud hanging over Chad Kelly right now. Mm-hmm. And then you've got new situation in Hamilton and some changes in Ottawa. And I feel like it could be real wide open, especially if Ottawa can find a way to fix the problems that they've had in recent years, because I do think they've got a pretty solid roster and more depth at quarterback, and we'll see how the new OC is with Tommy Condell. And if all of a sudden Ottawa can find a way to go 8-10 or 9-9, and I'm not going to make major expectations beyond that. Boy, does this division get interesting in a hurry, where you could have 4 teams in and around that 500 mark, and that would certainly make for a fascinating second half of the season.
Well, it gets really juicy, because before we know it, June is going to be upon us, and you and I are going to be talking about, Bo Levi Mitchell and Drew Brown, and I'm really looking forward to you and I going toe-to-toe on some of those conversations when we talk a little bit of Canadian football. But until then, enjoy the Bulldogs and 67s. Hopefully we get a Game 7. Hey, if you do get into this in Southern Ontario, let me know. Maybe we can take in that Bulldogs game, and we can get some free passes. We can be media and get in there.
I already got my CHL pass, so I'm good. But I'll let you. If I'm coming to Brantford, I'll let you know. And by the way, you know what? Speaking of Ottawa Hamilton, I'm super excited. We're 10 days away. It's the 13th of April from the start of the CPL season.
Oh yes, yes.
Forge has been just the powerhouse that with Bobby Smirniotis, so much respect. I mean, I was able to call the Forge games in the PEI bubble in 2020, and just getting to know him and seeing how he operates, and watching the training sessions. I mean, just so much respect for Bobby and what he's done at Forge. But I do feel like Atlético Ottawa's got their best team on paper. They don't play the games on paper. They play the games on the pitch. But, man, it could be a lot of fun watching those two teams, not to mention Cavalry and some of the other teams in CPL this year going at it. I think it should be a great season, and looking forward to that, which is just over a week away.
Yeah, it's not far away. I mean, Forge, and for people forget, even though Forge won that title in such exciting fashion, that it was Calgary, the Cavalry that won the regular season, and they can't be too happy, and that's game number 1 for us boys here in the Hammer. So, yeah, we're looking forward to it, and we'll hook up real soon, and so much to talk about, AJ. Much appreciate your time, and again, the Ottawa area is a special one for me. I love seeing what's going on there, the respect that you guys give to the youth sports teams, and of course, as we talk about, there's a lot of linkage going on between Ottawa and Hamilton, so we appreciate your time and look forward to joining us again on the Sportsline Podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure as always, Bubs.
All right, man. Take care of yourself. Hey, folks. Well, week 1, or at least week 1, and the week is underway here as we've begun here on the Sportsline Podcast. And if you do know of an extra special athlete, team, or event that deserves our attention, we do want to hear from you. Please smash that thumbs up, like, and subscribe button. If you do have a comment, make sure you do it because we appreciate your feedback. For the amazing people that make the Sportsline Podcast possible, thank you so much, and we'll see you tomorrow.